candidates that Pierre Poilievre is recruiting to run for the Conservative Party. A couple of weeks ago, we spoke to Aaron Gunn. Remember that? The filmmaker from Vancouver Island and his new movie about the state of the Canadian military. You know, Aaron is such a good egg, and I love the fact that he is a wonderful storyteller in video, but the idea of having him in the bosom of government is even better. And I'm very excited for Aaron Gunn. And there is another person who is a great communicator. You know him well. And to learn that he has thrown his hat into the ring for the Conservative Party nomination, so he's not yet the confirmed candidate, but he is seeking that, and I have high hopes for him, makes me feel good because Pierre Poilievre is recruiting an excellent team of people. I'm talking about our friend Andrew Lawton of True North, who is now a candidate nominee, and he joins us via Skype from his home in London, Ontario. Andrew, first of all, congratulations. It's sort of exciting and a little dangerous to jump from journalism to politics, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I should clarify, I've not been recruited or anything, but I do think Pierre Poilievre is attracting some very top-tier talent. And when I wrote about him in my book that came out earlier this summer, it was one of the things that I noted. And this was long before I thought that I might end up doing the same thing. But unlike in the past, where conservative leaders have really shied away from anyone who has said anything and done anything, Pierre Poilievre has welcomed that. People like Aaron Gunn and Jamil Javani and Roman Baber and Matt Strauss. And I think that, regardless of what happens with my own political ambitions here, it's going to be a really, really strong bench when the Conservatives form government next election.
That's such a good point. I mean, Jamil Javani, I see him. He won that by-election, I think, in Aaron O'Toole's old riding, and I see him in Parliament, and he's hitting hard. And I like to see it. But some of the other names you mentioned, including Matt Strauss, for example, you mentioned that Poilievre is a little more comfy with candidates that might attract criticism from the left wing of the media party. I think that's very right. Give me your thoughts on that, because politicians normally are terrified about some old statement being dredged up on Twitter. I mean, I suppose it's fair enough because it's hung around the neck of the whole party. So to show some courage and to hire some spicier people, for example, people who were pro-trucker, people who were skeptical of forced vaccine mandates, that's a statement, I think, that Poilievre's not going to allow the wackos in the press to veto his candidates.
And I think it's more importantly about not letting the tail wag the dog and not letting the media set the agenda. You may remember, and I talked about this on my show, in the 2021 election, there were points when the Conservatives changed their platform, their printed, bound, laminated platform, after it was released because they didn't like the types of questions they were getting from the media on things like firearms, for example, or free votes on matters of conscience. So I think there is a very different tone in the Conservative Party today. And I would also point out that it doesn't just extend to candidates. There was a younger woman who was working in Doug Ford's government who donated, I think it was $50 to the Freedom Convoy when that was happening a couple of years ago. And when the hack came out and the names were released, she was fired. She, not long after, was hired by Pierre Poilievre's Conservative Party of Canada to be, I think it was in the communications office some way. Someone who had been shown the door for donating to the truckers had a home there. So I do think it's a very encouraging sign as someone like me who's been a longtime advocate for a very real set of principles that we desperately need in politics and in our country.
I didn't know that about that young lady. I remember the story of her getting sacked. It was outrageous. The fact that she was hired after that incident is very encouraging. It's dangerous to go from journalism into politics, although a lot of people do it. I think of Danielle Smith, the current premier of Alberta, John Tory, the former mayor of Toronto, same thing. He had a talk show. The reason it's dangerous is because you opine on everything under the sun, and maybe you say things in the moment that make sense journalistically. But if people say, this is the core of your character and your policy, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is you have a lot more fodder out there for critics to choose from, although it is practice at handling questions. Like, there's really no better training to be a politician than to manage a call-in radio show, because you're going to hear from everybody. And I don't know, I guess it's good practice. What do you think? I mean, you've done it. Yeah. You've done the radio, you've done the print, and of course you were the chief reporter over at True North for years.
Yeah, I think that it's two things. Number one is that it makes me a much more desirable candidate, I think, to voters because they know where I stand on the issues. I'm not someone that is coming who's just devising a poll-tested, focus grouped set of positions that I think will work. I have been talking about the things that matter to me and advocating for the issues that I care about for years. And you know, it's a thing that people will know keeps me accountable because the last thing I want to be in Ottawa is the guy who has to field calls from people that used to look at my show or listen to my show and say, well, hang on, you used to say this on this, and why are you doing this? So I think it keeps me honest and keeps me accountable. But also, I think in journalism, one of the great skill sets is knowing which questions to ask. It's not where I say that I'm an expert on every issue, but I pride myself on being able to know who the experts are, to really get to the bottom of it, to root out the BS. And that's a skill set that I think is very necessary in government. I mean, anyone who's seen my interviews that I've done over the years with people that might be more hostile to me could probably quite easily picture me jumping into a committee role when we're trying to get to the bottom of, you know, the Arrive scam or the We scandal or something like that, because I was doing that on my show already. So I think there is a transferable skill set there, most definitely.
Well, how's your book doing, by the way? I mean, I remember you and I spoke about it before, and you told me, and this surprised me, and I felt good about it, that actually the CBC opened their doors to you and they actually let you talk about your book, even though it was sympathetic to Pierre Poilievre and you yourself are on the conservative side of the aisle. Are they still friendly to you, the CBC, now that you've thrown your hat in the ring? I mean, I don't quite know why they were friendly to you. Maybe because you were really the first guy to come out with a book, and it was quite an authoritative book about Poilievre, so they all wanted to read it, and they all want to sort of crack the code of Poilievre. So maybe they were just actually being journalists for once. Are they still friendly to you?
Well, look, I haven't been fending off many CBC calls, and I think that's probably good for their sake and for my sake since I ran. I mean, there was a relatively fair article about me when I launched my campaign, and I don't have any issues with that or their coverage of me in the last little while, although we'll see in the future. I think a lot of the legacy media had realized by looking at the poll numbers that they were clearly missing something. How does this guy that they put out this message on as being Trumpian or far right or this or that, how is he resonating with so people? So I do think for some in particular, there was a genuine and earnest desire to at least understand a bit more about him. And yeah, I did dozens of interviews with CBC, with other legacy media outlets as well. And the book was on the bestseller list for a couple of months. And I'm very grateful for that. And I think that as the election nears, probably more people will be interested in it because still I'm getting messages from people that say, oh, I just got your book or I'm just about to get it, because they're seeing like this guy, Pierre Poilievre, is not just a flash in the pan. Like he is prepared to do something very monumental in Canadian politics just by virtue of the mandate he's on track to get. And people are wanting to understand a little bit more about where he's come from and also what that is likely to mean for a future Poilievre government.
You know, I like to follow David Coletto, the pollster from Abacus. First of all, he's actually a really nice guy and a really smart guy. But second of all, that firm has some connections to the Liberal Party. In fact, its founding chairman was sort of a Liberal insider. And the reason I say that is because if they say things are looking good for Pierre Poilievre, they're not saying that because they like to hear it. They're saying that sort of contrary to their own political instincts. So I trust them extra when they have, quote, good news for conservatives. And I saw they had a poll about a week or two ago that talked about how firm voters are in their commitment to Pierre Poilievre. You know, people can lean one way or lean the other, but the firmness with which people say they're going to vote for the conservative candidate, Pierre Poilievre, is so hard. Like those people will not be swayed by anything. And then there's the probably won't be swayed. The number who said they're still open to changing is so low. I mean, unless some cataclysm emerges, and that's always possible, I think that he's going to be the next prime minister. And I think the whole country is sort of getting ready for that. I know grassroots people are like ordinary citizens are waiting for that. I think CEOs are coming around to that. I saw a weird attack on him in the Globe and Mail yesterday saying he wasn't friendly enough to CEOs. He needs to listen more to CEOs. And I thought that was written by a former communications director for Brookfield, which of course is Mark Carney's company. And I thought, if the Globe and Mail is writing columns telling Pierre Poilievre he needs to listen to our kind of people more, it's because they know he's going to be prime minister.
The one thing I love, Ezra, because there has been from the legacy media over the last few months no shortage of columns and stories about what Pierre Poilievre really needs to do is this. He needs to be nicer. He needs to be nicer to the media. He needs to be more conciliatory to the left. And it's really difficult to take seriously any article based on the premise of Pierre Poilievre needs to do X when he's been consistently polling over 40%. Like, that was one of the questions when my book came out. And again, I stress I was not at all eyeing political office at the time, but when my book came out and I was doing interviews, people were saying, well, do you think Poilievre needs to do this and that? And I'm saying, look, whatever he's doing now is working. So if you're trying to suggest that some course correction is needed, it really isn't for his benefit, it's for yours. It's because you think or you want him to conform to your expectations and demands of what a conservative leader is. And I hate to break it to you, the Conservatives did that in 2021, and where did it get them? Nowhere.